it's always kind of shocking when we pull back the curtain on our potato storage rack in the basement and we see these long sprouts like shooting up towards the ceiling. Some of them are like 2 or 3 feet long even. They look like these like alien fingers reaching up at you, and it's really creepy actually. And so we're gonna plant some of these potatoes, and I'm gonna show you all the tips and tricks that we've learned so you can still have a great potato harvest. So we've always ordered our seed potato or bought it from the store in the past, and what you get is, you know, a nice uniform looking potato with little tiny sprouts that are just at the point where they're ready to go into the ground and be planted, and they look perfect and great. A couple of years ago, we decided we wanted to start saving our own potatoes for seed and planting those the following spring. And then come April, this right here is what our potatoes look like. Every year, they have these long sprouts. And what these sprouts actually are the stems that want to be growing above ground and sprouting out leaves. But they can't do that yet because they're not planted in the ground. And so you want to leave these sprouts on. That's the first thing. You don't want to remove them. That's going to set the potato back. I like to think of potatoes, or actually any seed for that matter, as like a battery. There's stored up energy inside these potatoes, and that's what's regrowing a new plant so that it can repropagate the next year during the growing season. And so this potato right here has already used a ton of its energy reserve inside its, battery to grow these sprouts. And so you want to leave them in place and plant them just as they are. So first things first, you're going to want to consider where you want to plant your potatoes at. Generally, they prefer full sunlight or partial shade, but if you can avoid it, full sunlight is best. And then you're going to want to find, the ideal is loamy soil. So this is a good candidate right here, this nice kind of crumbly, loamy soil. Very like clay-filled soils aren't great, and so your potatoes might not yield the best in heavy clay soils. Or sandy soils also are probably okay to plant potatoes in, but you're going to have to water those potatoes a lot more than you would in a nice loamy soil. So the typical way to plant potatoes is in a trench like we have here. And this is a really long row. It's like a 150-foot row that we plant all of our potatoes in. We have most of them planted and in the ground, but I left this little section open that we're going to plant here today. And so you'll want to dig a trench anywhere from about 6 inches to even 12 inches deep to plant your potatoes in. And there's kind of 2 strategies with potatoes. I'd say the standard thing to do is to plant them anywhere from 4 to 8 inches deep to start, and then you mound on top of them with more soil as they start to grow, and it's called hilling. You hill or you mound on top of them. Our strategy is we just try and get a trench as deep as we can initially. We get them in the ground, and then we keep it pretty hands-off from there. We don't do any mounding. We've done that in the past, but we haven't really found that much different of a yield from mounding versus not mounding. And so it's a lot of extra work to mound, so we just don't do it, and we still have pretty good results. And because potatoes are planted pretty deep in the ground, they have a long growing season that you can plant them in. So early in the spring, basically as long as the ground is thawed, you can get your potatoes in the ground, or even pretty late into the season, as long as you can harvest them before the snow really starts falling and the ground starts freezing over, you can plant potatoes in any of those conditions. And then when it comes to planting your potatoes in the ground, you actually have 2 options for how to do that. The first one is that you can actually cut your potato into smaller sections. The advantage of this is that you can kind of get a better bang for your buck or cover more ground. If you have a lower quantity of seed potato and a lot of ground to cover, that might be your best option. That's what we've done in the past. Right now we have a ton of seed potato, and so we're not even worrying about that. That's the other option, is that you could just plant the whole potato in the ground. But if you are going to cut them, the first thing you want to do is to try and have at least 2 sprouts per section of potato. And so whether it's just a little nubber of a sprout or a big long sprout, you want at least 2 of those on each section. It's also generally recommended that after you cut your potatoes, you let them sit for a couple days so that that cut end can kind of dry out and cure before you put them in the ground and plant them. I'll be honest, we typically don't do that. A lot of times we just cut them and put them in the ground the same day, and we've had pretty much the same results either way. And then for planting your cut potatoes, you want to make sure that the cut side is facing down, and then your sprouts will be facing up. And so that's planting cut potatoes. Planting whole potatoes is essentially the same process, just with your whole potato, and you don't have that extra step of cutting them. So that's what we're going to be doing here today. And so again, a reminder, when you plant these, you want to be very delicate with the sprouts, make sure that they stay intact, but you're basically just going to put your potatoes in your trench, kind of work them down into the soil a little bit, as low as you can get those potatoes in the trench. Typically, you plant potatoes about 12 inches apart. We have a ton of seed potato, and they're all fairly kind of past their peak with these long sprouts. We tend to plant them a little bit closer together, and we still had great success with it. So we plant them like 6 to 8 inches apart, and we've gotten great yields with our potatoes every year doing that. But 12 inches apart, typically what's recommended. But you're gonna put those potatoes with the sprouts laying into the trench as well. You don't want the sprouts sticking up above the ground. You want to lay those down in the trench so that you're actually going to cover those over with soil once you cover up the potatoes in the end. But basically what I do is I kind of start at one end, put my potato in with the sprouts facing one direction, and then, you know, every 6 to 12 inches then I'm putting in another potato with these long sprouts facing in that same direction, so that they all kind of just fill the trench. And then after that trench is filled and you've got your spacing right with your potatoes, I come back through with a landscape rake and just pull soil back over those potatoes, mound it up right on top of where the potatoes were planted as best I can, so that I have the most coverage of soil on top of those potatoes. And then that's really it. We try and time it so that we plant them right before a big rain. So we just planted all these other potatoes a few days ago, and then it rained like a 1/4 inch the next day, and that was great. If it's not going to rain, you might want to consider bringing a hose or a sprinkler or some drip irrigation out and getting those potatoes nice and moist and keeping them moist. But after they're planted, about a week later, you should start to see some of these stems or sprouts starting to come up, pop up through the soil. You'll start to see the potato leaves forming. And then after about 3 months' time, you can start harvesting your potatoes. So if you find yourself in the same position with these long sprouts like this on your seed potatoes, don't give up. Don't toss those potatoes out. Put them in the ground, plant them, and you could have a really great potato harvest that year still. And so I hope this has been helpful for you. Thanks so much for stopping by the farmstead today, and we'll see you next time.